listening to It's Killing Me, where I, comedian Shane Kenny, unpack the history of mental health and all the things that impact it. So we've been on hiatus since about August because things have been WTF, way too fiery. In September, there was a fire in this building, like higher up, not us. This was not our fault. This was not my fault. And we had some water damage, so that caused us to have to vacate completely. And then in January, LA became a Bad Religion song and Los Angeles was burning. And boy, did they foreshadow it perfectly. So we dropped what we were doing over here to volunteer to help our community out the absolute best we could, because this was not a priority. The needs of our community were. But now, things have settled in. We're still recovering. We're going to be recovering for a long time, and there's still a lot of people in great need of help. But we're back, and we are happy to put out more shows, more information, more humor and mishaps from my quest to understand mental health better. So, without further ado, I want to introduce our guest today. Writer, actor, activist, David Robinson Hicks.
Hello, how you doing? Oh, Shane, it has been amazing just to hear what you've been up to with this podcast. And honestly, just getting the chance to reconnect with you after 15 years. Yeah, we came up together in a poetry group. And I don't know how much you want to get into that.
Yeah, let's get into it.
Yeah. But we came up together in Get Lit, and it was this awesome poetry, honestly, like an intervention program. It was like, it directed and diverted the trajectories of a lot of kids' lives. It's active here in Los Angeles. Shout out to Diane Luby Lane. And I got into it when I was like about to graduate. And one of our first teachers, I believe you were here when David was there too, David Diggs of Hamilton fame, Sebastian in the
I did not have the good honor of being tutelaged and taught by David Diggs.
Whoa.
That was just before I showed up.
Oh my God, I'm sorry, but you do Get Lit a great service. You're carrying on the activism in a great way, and I just want to give you your props for walking the walk the way you do. And
Thank you. Because I do, when I'm volunteering, I do miss being on stage, and I see other poets having fun. I'm like, I know, but I gotta get this aid distributed.
Exactly. Like duty calls, and it's that trade. It's that handshake that we were talking about before. A handshake of, okay, I want all of my highfalutin capitalistic dreams to merge with my understanding of intuitive indigenous wisdom. And it's a tightrope. It really is. But with where we met and the journeys that we've followed since then, I'm really grateful for that point of origin. We're both big Naruto fans, so I am very in the space of like the will of fire and inherited will, and it all ties back to that little shinobi academy we had going on and Get Lit.
That's a great way of putting it, because it's like everyone had their jutsus and their elements they specialized in, and then we had the sensei who were happy to swat us back to reality. Black out half a page and say better and faster.
Exactly. Paul Mabon, congrats on Progressive, but my pen is still mightier than the sword in a lot of ways. Oh God, that one poem. Yeah.
Now, seeing Paul in the Progressive commercials is like seeing a shinobi who's on the rear guard, where it's just like, oh, he's just here to support.
Yeah.
But if it came down to it, they could steal the show.
Yeah, absolutely. And it works on so many levels because like we're actors as well, and every time we walk into an audition room, we know it's like, oh man, this guy's got a Kekkei Genkai that can take out this whole room. But they're asking him to do the UCB game approach of the scene and just like work on this little portion of their talent. And it's something that through self-producing, through finding the right community and showing off the right value proposition, we can transcend. But it's a tango.
And I think as artists, there's always that doing what you have to do to pay the bills and making a living off of it, which is great and awesome because it's hard to do. So few people do it, and commercial actors do find a place in our hearts because we do see them every night. And the more likable, lovable, and skillful they are, the more bearable these product placements are. Like I'm not a fan of commercials, but when I see Paul on TV, it's like it warms my heart. Like, oh, the homie poetry sensei is getting work and able to feed himself, and I love seeing that he's doing poetry shows where he can shine a little more because he has the time and means to do these projects that mean so much to him. And I feel like a lot of artists have to understand there is that compromise of, hey, doing this for a living means you're going to have to do gigs that are less than center stage for you. And from a both warrior and performer perspective, being a supporter is much needed because you only need one person who can deliver the devastating jutsu or the revving up speech. And we need to give space for those, and you never know when your time and that opportunity is going to arise because
I appreciate how far we've taken this war arc analogy because in a lot of ways we are in this creative war arc to fight the infinite Tsukuyomi that technology and the culture of dissemblance is trying to force on all of us. And I just applaud you for breaking in and doing all of the earnest work in art that you're doing, all of the work to elevate your own message and your own purchase on This Is My Truth and bring us all along for the ride. So big fan of It's Killing Me podcast. So glad you're back. Welcome back.
I empathize with that. I very much appreciate it as well. I love the Tsukuyomi reference because that feels like what social media and the news is like. Everything's fine. No, you're right. You're so right. They're the problem. We are. There's nothing you could possibly do because I feel like everyone's looking for a savior, whether it be a scientist or a political figure. And I feel with social media, and especially in LA where we're isolated with cars, it's easy to forget and to think we're in our bubbles. And then when we do meet others, we're coming up against friction. And I appreciate what you say about my work because I have learned the hard way the last few years that truth does have a price. I lost a job because I shared a post by an Irish politician speaking out about Palestine. And it broke my heart, but at the same time, it freed me up to do more organizing and activism because I was unemployed and understood when people were saying that they were losing their jobs, and I'm lower labor. It's heartbreaking to think that all these people in higher echelons of power, influence, academia, and politics are losing their jobs because they care about Palestine. Because this is like a great empathy and litmus test of, hey, time to bring all those World War II movies to fruition. Time to stand against them. And it's like, for all of the Nazis were bad, we're going to do it. This will never happen again. Because, like, growing up, you see just so many World War II movies, and being a history nerd, like, there's so many other wars. Many other heartwarming moments of solidarity and unity and moments to enlighten each other about culture and misunderstandings. But in America, it's just World War II movies. That's partially because of the Zionist Israel lobby. But getting into, like, that mentality, and then we see it happening now, and it's just like, come on, what were we all not watching the same things? Like, you thought it was gonna be all, like, when you see the Quentin Tarantino movies and all the pros who love that, like 100 Nazi scalps, and then half those guys are lining up to lick boots now.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and it really misuses what film was made for, which was an empathy machine. It's an opportunity to equalize and put us all on the same level and be like, hey, it's our experience versus this person's experience for 90 minutes or however long. But all we can do is stand against it, and we don't want to be as radical as we are. I think that's what a lot of people don't understand. It's weird that as soon as somebody gets into an echelon of an email job, suddenly they're walking this very dangerous escape room of, like, okay, do I align with the neoliberal agenda, or do I like take a glance to the left?
I just took a peek of the left. I didn't read the whole manifesto.
Exactly.
I just looked at it and
Yeah.
tried to understand how Rage Against the Machine got that killer bass line from reading that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I feel like a lot of people, like, to bring it to our main topic today, are grieving the loss of who they thought was going to help them through the dark time, of the institutions, of the normalcy, of the systems of civics and governance that we have taken for granted. Like everything to these more lower level and more internal governmental employees, like with agriculture and housing and education, all this stuff that was like, these things were hard enough, but now
Now we're doing it with half the staff.
yeah, it's like, hey, the apartment wasn't perfect, but now we're hammering away at the foundations. And I feel this, and I felt this during the fires, of people were grieving the future.
Yeah.
They were grieving the stability. It's like, oh, that home I thought my family was going to live in for generations is gone.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, this ecosystem we took for granted is on thin ice. And the city that was already dealing with its own general health issues now has this massive toxic air problem, and it's just like the Palisades, specifically Eden Canyon and Altadena, those are the new Cancer Alley, and Altadena and Eden are probably going to get the worst of it because they're the black and brown communities, and if you're dividing up funds 50-50, the rich white community's still going to
they're still got, it's a subsidy for them.
Yes.
It's everything for Eden.
Yeah, and so speaking of grief, what has been your grief journey? Like,
well,
what sparked it? What have you been?
Around the time we were working together at Get Lit, probably the reason why I didn't stick around a little longer is because for the second time in my life, I had to become the breadwinner for my family. My uncle, his name was Dr. Geek. He was known as the Blue Blocker Sunglass Guy. He was a street performer, rapper, wordologist, he'd call himself. He passed away, and I had to become the breadwinner for my family and enter into some, it was a level up that I needed. I entered the regional theater community that really saved me. I entered as a music assistant in PA. It revitalized my passion for art and really recontextualized my understanding of what art could do to change hearts and minds by seeing 8 shows a week what people were accessing to communicate that result. But I was witnessing that at a time where I was so deeply broken. And a couple of years after that, my mother passed away. My mother was the reason I still consider myself an activist. If it weren't for, again, the inherited will, like whatever my clan does, it's because Rhoda Robinson did that. It's like, okay, I gotta like pull out that scroll and read a couple of jutsus from that every once in a while, or else it's gone forever. You know what I mean? So those two deaths really put me on a growth journey that was just the understanding that, okay, I'm not going to make the world better without all of that inherited wisdom. And of course, we always have the thoughts of like, oh, if I just stay where I am, if I end it now, of all the options that give into entropy, we could dare to do the harder thing and say like, oh, if I connect with people beyond this grief, how much further can I force the needle?
That's a lot.
Absolutely, dude.
Like,
it's been a hell of a time.
Like, if your life is a house, your parents are the two foundational pillars.
Mm-hmm.
And losing both of them, I can't imagine how earth-shattering that is. And the second you lose one, even more weight falls on the other. And props to you for stepping up. And that was the thing, is I didn't always know why people stopped showing up, and even now, like, we're hearing about it after the fact. And I'm sorry I wasn't able to be there more, or like, because I our little community of poets, it's what warmed my heart the most was that LA is so territorial, and we were from every corner,
Mm-hmm.
and we shattered stereotypes from each other's neighborhood. When it's like, no, 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 they're cool. No, 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 he's cool, and that you had more in common with someone on the other side of town from a different background than the people that grew up a block from you.
For real.
And to add on to your Naruto art metaphor, I feel like that I is the case with a lot of artists of you became this strong because life forced you to. You honed this ability to express and to think because you needed something to cling on to in a rough moment. And at the same time, I feel like I've seen many artists consumed by it because they don't know how to stop expressing. They don't know how to break free of that tool.
Mm-hmm.
And I think back to what poetry sensei Paul Mabon taught us of, if you let it out, make sure you can get it back in. Like, go there, but come back. Because that's where the power is. And that's where Naruto gets his most strength,
Mm-hmm.
is when he's thinking about his most sacred bonds.
Yeah.
And the times he failed all those people. That was always the, let me go there, but then he comes back and then uses talk no jutsu and everything's all right.
Mm-hmm.
But that he uses his words in the end.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, I could flick these jutsu atom bombs, but I want to talk to you.
Absolutely.
And that strength of, because especially as like, dude, so much of our mentality is like, warrior, fight. But then to see like a guy who's a poet go on stage and talk about everything turning them and keeping them awake at night, and then walk away, have a laugh, and say, I went there, but it's not controlling me.
Yeah.
Because I feel like a lot of us, as when we see males in our lives, they let that anger out, but they don't come to terms with it. They walk away, they leave the building, and they punch something, or they disappear while, and they come back like, oh, no, I'm cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a wonderful point, because like when you think about the masters of dialogue of your life, like passing on, going on to glory, you realize just how commanded by quiet violence the world is.
Ooh, quiet violence.
Mm-hmm.
Go on.
Oh, absolutely. It's commanded by like, okay, you're going to wake up, you're going to show up to work, you're going to do these things, but unless you master that talk no jutsu in your own life, unless you say that we're working towards a greater goal, not always a covert goal, but sometimes just there's light at the end of this tunnel, and knowing how to communicate that to people, then you'll find yourself lost. And I can consider myself very grateful for the journey. And in a lot of ways, Shane, you were there. Everyone, like, whenever someone's in a deeper place, we're still looking up. We're still like that little anglerfish that went that went viral. You know, we're like, oh, I'm gonna go towards the sun. We're always going towards the sun, even if the pressure's keeping us down.
Yeah.
And for a lot of those years, we were, I still say we as if like they're still with me, because they are. You know?
Oh, yeah.
You know, the thing about grief is that you these souls pass on, but you are collectively their conduit. And sometimes the vision gets collectively stronger as things, as more people pass on, and you realize like each one is a part of the puzzle that is ultimately going to become you. And, to focus on how we develop both as the protagonists in our lives, but also as the mentors in our lives, I'm looking towards who's the next child of prophecy. Like, okay, I've already seen my great ninja war. I've already seen probably all the action that I'm gonna do. How do I set up the village? How do I build a hidden village for the next that are gonna come up, so that they can have their orange jumpsuits and not just have to be in flak jackets? And how can they have their own great adventure? It's like, okay, we're all just trying to make the world more Ghibli, you know?
Solar Punk and Studio Ghibli vibes are gonna save us. Yeah, I think that was kind of the interesting thing about meeting through art.
Yeah.
Is you didn't always know people's background, but you'd hear them spill their guts with a writing workshop, and then you'd be like, oh, hey, nice to meet you. And and that interesting thing of like the ice was shattered. Like we played Zip Zap Zop, and now we're
yeah, and now you're telling me I'm like, oh, that's probably terrible what you just went through. I'm gonna shake your hand, and we're gonna build from there.
Yeah, but at the same time, it was like teaching you strength of like that person who I assumed this and that about is carrying that.
Yeah,
and I still remember poems Carlos did in Get Lit, and like, oh, he went through all of that and showed us all this love and kindness. He wasn't cynical. He wasn't saying fuck you to everyone. He was showing love and gratitude.
Yeah.
Like, that's strength. And and talking about pupils and like the next generation, I do feel that when I'm with my little brother and I see his friends, or when like I'm talking to people who are in their early 20s and I feel old, and I've had that having taught music, and that I think about all the little lessons from those little things and from those teachers where it's like, oh, that was they might not think twice about that, but I've held on to that lesson because I was going through this at that time as a kid, and it helped me look at things that way. And I felt a lot of that when I was getting back into organizing around Palestine, around the fires of, oh, I've done this before. Cops are there, and there. Let's fall back to here with the Trump getting elected again. Like, I led an angry mob of 200 students at San Francisco State the night Trump got elected. Nice. Because I was like, I saw that the freshmen and sophomore and other people on campus were panic smoking and then panic drinking. And I'm like, if I don't lead this, some windows are going to break and the few conservatives on campus are going to get mauled. So we marched around. The cops showed up, cool as a whistle. I was a few drinks in and my lungs were ripe. I held my own against the cop because I had been organizing, so I'm used to these fellers and their intimidation. And then we kept marching from midnight till 4 a.m. And seeing Trump get elected again, it just was like, I kind of felt like Kakashi was just like, oh, another war. Cool. Like, oh no, are we bad at this? Not really, but just got the playlist, got the kunai, the mask, and your banners and insignia. And I feel like also that's where art is so vital. And to bring this back to something I wanted to ask you, what were songs that helped you grieve?
Oh gosh, Green Day for sure. I started this whole journey with a very basic musical catalog. I had my Green Day. I had my 18. I had my Allie and AJ.
Okay, Allie and AJ, thank you as a guy. Like, I had a crush on both of them. I liked their music. And growing up with 3 brothers, I'm like, is this manly enough? Am I allowed to like this?
Yeah, but it's like, you start that journey and then you discover your Rise Against. You discover your Far Side.
Rise Against.
Rise Against. They're represented in the room here. Yes, indeed. I love the Far Side. I love a lot of the people that were foundational to my Uncle Geek's musical journey too. And so Bootsy Collins, we got,
Bootsy. Slap bass got me through the pandemic. Like, I was sitting in my place in San Francisco just watching Naruto and playing bass and thanking Mother Nature for her bounty that I had left over. And like, yes, and Bootsy Collins, I had the good honor of coming across it. I worked with someone who worked with George Clinton and Parliamentary Funk, and I heard some wild stories that I am not at liberty to say.
I understand.
But I was just like, so they wanted something more than just the funk, apparently.
No, they absolutely
But hey,
did.
if wanting that helps them get the funk, I am all for them having that.
Yeah. It's like creating a fertile ground for that kind of music again with the technology that we have available and the amount of sampling and the amount of just sheer musical talent that comes with the unstoppable march of time. Because a lot of these runs that people were able to do in the 70s, like, oh, it's second nature to this 12-year-old. That 12-year-old needs to step into the equivalent of a Columbia Records in the 60s and be able to become the session musician. So a lot of the reason I continue to do this is because we run into those old heads that have those foundational experiences with like, oh yeah, that bass line changed my life. That bass line paid for 3 houses.
Dude, we need record store geeks because that's like I realized like listening to like the radio at different places I walk into. It's like radio ain't what it used to be, where it's like a DJ like, and this is even before our time. Like roughly like the '90s and early 2000s was that last bit of like K-rock going, okay, they're not paying us, but we'll play you this one song. But just people saying, we're not being paid to show you this. But you need to hear it. Because whenever I was hanging out at like record stores or with old hippies or with artists in the underground scene in San Francisco, it's like, that's who you're listening to? Okay, never heard of them. And like my friends and coworkers and family make fun of me, like, we've never heard about these bands. It's like, these are what the real ones are listening to. And like Bootsy Collins is one of them. And like I'm kind of disappointed in Rise Against because they've been real silent, and I don't know if it's just that they're like, oh, there's no market, if they're focusing on their kids. But I was like, Rise Against, where's the song about Palestine? Rise Against. Like, and that was a little bit disappointing because they were, so many of their songs are great to grieve to, and like I definitely turned to them when I was grieving myself, and that's where the torch gets passed on, where you're like, oh, the people that made the art that helped get us through aren't there anymore. We have to
exactly. It's like where you wouldn't think the torch goes from Rise Against to Lupe Fiasco, but
if Lupe Fiasco's like, here's my poetic song about consumerism.
Exactly. And like we create these long-standing bonds of allyship that, you know, eventually it's going to bail up and hogtie the establishment eventually. And it's all about patience. It's all about making laterally a strong enough band of community wellness so that we can come together and like weather the storm, so that more of us, just on the strength of averages, can see when the dawn comes. And that's what my mom was a big believer in. She was teaching drama, dance, music, and art right up until the Watts riots. Right up until the Watts riots right here. And that's when she moved her program to New York.
She's like, like, all right, this is...
Yeah, but it was similar. It was similar, too, to what the Fires have been doing, to what whatever we have with the second Trump presidency has been doing, to the breadbasket of resources available to NGOs. So we've seen this all before in microcosms, and our community organizers are always going to know what it's like, because it's so hard to give something away for free. I'm sure you know this very well. It's so hard to get people to say like, oh wait, I can have this? I dare I say deserve this? I deserve an enriching, fulfilled life where I'm not just running to work, running home, crying myself to sleep. We've always deserved it. And, you know, we used to have such well-rounded lives before we were sold this vision of, okay, we're almost at that point of class consciousness again. But every time they're going to like snap back and call it Soma, every time they're going to, try to make Aldous Huxley's Brave New World a reality. It's one of my favorite books, by the way. It's just going to become more and more violent. I'm just trying to save the world a lot of trouble, a lot of violence, and that's what we can do as artists, is what I mean to say.
Absolutely. Art is for when we're in the trenches, when we're lost, when we need a vision, because the information's all there. Like, I was thinking, like, how can I help? How can I best be forward? And for, like, us when we were coming up, it was like, yes, poetry, yes, this music. Mm-hmm. And it was relevant because it was coming out, like, Rise Against songs were like, okay, I'm grieving this. There's a song about the oil spill. They understand the two situations are happening at the same time. And like with the fires, like you said, we're on the brink of that class consciousness because people lost what they worked for, and then they're being deprived what the system they paid to uphold. And I like that you brought up Aldous Huxley, because when I was like volunteering and doing aid distribution stuff, I was like on the phones with different distribution hubs. So anytime a place had a surplus of something, we made sure we moved that to other places that had a deficit. So wherever anyone was, it was like a one-stop shop. We had an even amount of everything, but I was also just like going like, I was like thinking, it's kind of communist. No, don't say the C word. Do not say the C word. Every time America gets close to the C word, it's just like, we're going further right. Because there's all these moments in American history where it's like, you just described communism, and then it's just like, what? It's like, oh no. And
yeah.
But it was heartwarming seeing that was just people go, we're just helping each other. It's like, that's what, okay, I'm not. And to bring it back to Aldous Huxley, someone said, Parabola of Sorrow, and I'm like, I can't right now. Yes, a little too accurate, but I can't, like, because like my head, then the rest of it was like connecting the dots between Parabola of the Sorrower and now, and I'm just like, it's a good thing I'm funny.
No, it's a gift to be funny because it really cuts through everything. It's like I've been dabbling in the stand-up scene myself lately too. So big ups for you for being able to handle that soon.
Like, I want to say welcome to the stand-up scene, but it is a dark jungle full of primates swinging on each other and mutually forming alliances. Because like the thing that made listening to stand-up impossible for me was being in the stand-up scene. So if you like stand-up comedy as an art form, stay out of the scene. The longer you are in it, the more you're just be like, you're going to grind your teeth, hack, they did that, I heard a rumor about them. And also it's like, just... That being said, I still love hanging out with comedians, but it's love, hate...
Yeah.
But I think humor is very important because, like, the way I describe, like, my journey, like, comedy saved the poet I was, and poetry saved the comedian I became.
Ooh, that's lovely.
Like, I did need to stop laughing about stuff at a certain point. And then there are times where it's like, no, I need to laugh about this, because that's what I felt like doing poetry in high school. I was like, I was just drenched in my unresolved traumas. Like, I was digging them out, but I wasn't putting them back. And then on top of that, it was like I was listening to stand-up every moment I had outside of there. And it's just like, oh, I need to laugh. And but at the same time, I did not know where to go with it. Because it's like, okay, what do I do with these two? So now that we've talked about, like, fiction, what are some of the worst portrayals of grief you've seen in like TV and movies? Someone were like,
a lot of them are really bad.
Like grieving your parents. I know. Did you think about becoming Spider-Man? Was just
sometimes.
Were you going more the Batman route of like, I need to kill every Batman, so it's like beat senseless everyone involved in the demise of my parents?
A lot of that was. You turn a lot of that towards the people that are closest to you. I've always been one to dramatize my life and put these fictitious overlays on my life, which is, it sounds a little narcissistic, but really that's just how it was. I'm like, and it's always to Shakespearean levels. I'm always like, you, his closest friend, why weren't you there? Why couldn't you help us? And I was like, oh wait, no, I just needed to talk this out. And a lot of it was just bottling it up until the pandemic came. So when the pandemic gave me time to like sit down, go through a lot of personal effects, and realize that they had this eventuality planned, that my crash out about it was really also part of their plan. So just letting go of all that agency and power that I thought I had in this process. But to your question, Daredevil 03 didn't help.
The 2003 Daredevil,
Yeah,
or you're
right.
like Daredevil season 3.
Yeah, no. Just Daredevil 2003, the Ben Affleck.
Okay, just,
No. I do not mean like no. Charlie Cox is doing an amazing job as Daredevil.
I'm a Daredevil fan, so go on to, because I have my own issues with that movie, and I'm sure they're all incredibly petty, while yours are more genuine. Go on to
No. It's just the way it, romanticized the idea of like, all right, even though you can't see the world, you can be guided through it on blind rage, which really misses the point of a lot of Daredevil. I can say that, just the way that his dad met his end was, very just black and white. I'm like, okay, cool. Your reaction to that is sort of black and white. There were just levels of abstraction that were missing in the depiction of that if I'm trying to say, oh, that's a healthy way to handle grief, I'd be very wrong.
Yeah, and I also feel like that's sort of like, they're like, especially like when you grow up with a father who is very hands-on and trying to toughen you up, because you don't realize it now, but you realize after fact, like, oh, that's why they taught me how to like spar and throw hands and protect myself, and that's why they didn't cut me slack here and there. And it's that later, like, oh, I was frustrated with in the moment, but I'm grateful for it now. And I've had that with parents, with poetry mentors, where it's like, oh, they really laid into me, why did they do that? And then it's like, oh no, that's why.
Right.
That's why. And it's like, those are the lessons that take time to appreciate, but those are the ones that make the grieving process a little harder, is because it's not simply like, oh, I hate that they did that, I like that they did that. It's, I didn't get a chance to say I understood.
Yeah.
Or I empathize with that pain or what they were trying to show. And understanding like, oh, that probably came from them getting hurt or going through it, or another like coming of age moment. And especially like Daredevil having that relationship, like, I'm a fighter now. It's like, no, your dad did it in the ring. You're sneaking at people with a stick. Like,
right.
You're using sonar like a bat. And then,
yeah. No,
so,
totally.
Okay, so what was a good portrayal? Someone like, if someone like wants to like watch a movie show, it's
a good portrayal is absolutely Gurren Lagann. I always go back to that when I try to make peace with the fact that someone is gone, that we are stronger, not that we are better off, like, to remove any ambiguity to that statement, not that we are better off for them to like having been here and been gone, but we are better off for their memory being served, because sometimes when people pass into the ether, they get to work at 110% to the benefit of the people that they love. Like, no matter what your belief system, bottom line, sometimes our mortal coil is a trapping. And especially when you're dealing with people that have progressive illnesses, that are dealing with disabilities, we're trying to honor their vision for the world. And I know, at least in my mom's case, like, dealing with being a woman of color, being, like, she was a force of nature. And she meant to communicate all of these things to people for the times that she was not able to be a force of nature. And a lot of people did not make a passing grade, being like, oh yeah, Rhoda's always going to be there for us. When she wasn't, that's when we had to start our journey of figuring it out. Start our journey of like, oh, okay, do we know enough about our local elections? Okay, do we know enough about how to, what food banks are active right now? Have we checked in on our neighbor? All of these things were things sewn into her by people that were taken out of the game a little earlier than her. Mm-hmm. So to turn your back, like, a lot of grief in what is sold to us up until recently, because like a lot of the personal development space has had a big glow up lately, but up until recently, it felt like a lot of grief processing was to be like, oh, turn a blind eye, shunt it off, and start anew. Give yourself permission to start anew. But in reality, you want it to be like, this chain of the Avatar cycle.
Yes.
Yeah. You want to like benefit from all of this collective wisdom.
Yeah, and I feel like that's but that's why these like modern trends. It's like because that's hard.
Mm-hmm.
It's easy. Like it's so much of like breathing exercises, mindfulness, where it's like, no, I want to understand how we got here, what made them that way, and I empathize with that of when you like with uh when your mother is away, like as a kid, you realize how much like, oh, food, all my own care, if something bad happens aside from the thing, am I okay?
Mm-hmm.
And I can feel that in you, that warmness, that compassion, that willingness to take care of the broader community. And I feel like that is a great way of honoring and grieving people. Like, that was when Carlos was murdered. I was distraught and not handling things the best, but a lot of my activism after that was centered around and inspired by work he did with like homeless people, with like uh, the first night I was volunteering, I drove around for an hour because we had all these leftover meals. And it's like, hey, they're gonna go bad tomorrow, and I'm like, I was dead tired. I was like volunteering for 13 hours at that point. I had probably a meal and a half. I was like eating stale donation bread and hot dogs that one kind ally and volunteer was cooking up for us. And I was like, I can't let Carlos know I let all these meals went to waste. So I drove up and down my community because there were pockets of homeless people and was like, hey, I got meals ready to eat, and just hand them out. And there were a few people sleeping, and I turned to I could see who the people of that like block were, the like caretakers of their little commune, and was like, hey, can you make sure they get something? Like, oh yeah, we're and then I turned down the street, and the street I drove past was Carlos, and I was just like, ah,
Bro.
like what of all the street names, like, and it was just, it was because it felt like, hey, I know I'm not as good as living as he was, and I'm not as warm, but I'm doing what I can to make sure that light didn't go away.
You get it 100%.
Because like, what better way to honor people than to do the same actions so it's if they never left?
Yeah, just let them animate your corpse. That's all you
yes.
can do. we are puppets, and I know that
the chakra threads from the other realm.
Oh yeah, that's one device Kishimoto didn't quite use enough, huh? Right? That'd be crazy. Just like puppetry from the Pure Lands. Just to that'd be.
L. Ron Hubbard's doing it to like 100.
Oh God, no!
Just think of, he's like sorcery, where it's just like, God, they're all still moving.
That'd be wild. But yeah, no, you're so right. And in terms of the reason why we're waiting for solar punk to the level that we are, is that if everybody just had 15 minutes of like, oh, let me go into transcendent generosity mode, we're all going to be in a space where everything's free and together, and everyone fears just 15 minutes of altruism. Not that we aren't conditioned to fear it, and it's not no one's personal failing. It's just the idea that we can change someone's lives. I know that just things that I've done inadvertently, just honoring their legacy, like, get called up to me, and they're like, hey, yeah, thanks for doing that. I'm like, damn, that was in a moment of my deepest weakness. So thank you for gifting that back to me. So when we're talking, even in terms of, just these staunchly capitalistic terms like ROI and all these things, just think of the ROI of your actions when you jump the lane and invest in somebody else's experience for a minute. So a lot of it is also because, like, I'm not a natural born artist. I was an artist to be a breadwinner for my family.
Ooh.
I was an artist that, when my parents split, my mom and dad, they were, we were left destitute. We came out here. We started street performing. And then I was at this block party where the first agent happened to be. They liked how I was dancing, and they started submitting me for commercials. So all of this happenstance, all of these coincidences that led me even to, where we met at Get Lit. We have to acknowledge the improbabilities, the string of improbabilities that led us to where we are today, and dare to be fictional almost.
Dang, street performing. Like, okay, that's... I would have starved to death if I was just... If performing and art paid for my meals, I would have starved to death long ago. So I think that is all, like, circumstances terrible, but just like, dude, that you're like... So you were dancing as a street performer. Were you like
I was
doing
a
poetry?
4-year-old dancing, doing magic tricks. I was basically being part of the variety show that my parents were putting on at the time, and that was down on Venice Beach, where my uncle performed for a very long time. That's where he made his name for himself, and I have dabbled in that in the future. Since then, I have done busking. I have done other onstage stuff. I now do poetry again. I now do stand-up again, but back to the point of who we want to be as, in this comedy tapestry, I'd much rather be the Larry David to somebody Seinfeld than, be the guy in the stand-up world, because you are so right. There is a real crabs in the bucket mentality. There is like, hey, no, somebody does need to be in the audience, because it seems like you guys need my validation more than I need your validation. But that's true in so many aspects of art. I will challenge you in saying you're a very talented guy, so I don't think you'd have starved to death.
Oh no, I'm just saying by the blunt reality of...
Okay. I got you.
As someone who's routinely had to defend the art they do, even as it digs them into professional holes, where I'm like...
Yeah.
But, art aside, what are some healthy coping mechanisms you've had?
Definitely a diverse media diet. AFI Top 100 films and beyond. It's not just what the establishment says is good. I love anime, and honestly, cultivating friendships, if there are phases of your life where you can't reconcile like spending time with those people, I completely understand. But when I go back to people who've known me since I was 3 years old, like passing through those environments are tremendously restorative. And know what you're loading up on. Knowing what I'm loading up on is so important, because if I'm like, oh, I'm watching this anime to go volunteer for a couple hours a week, or I'm watching this anime so I could stand up to my boss and go for more equitable working conditions. Just knowing and being intimately acquainted with what your whole self needs. So it's all so much introspection, and when you're introspecting, you stumble upon more of the people that you lost than you realize, because just like you were saying, like they've impressed so many lessons on you that what you memorize of yourself is more or less what they've sown into you.
Yeah. Oof. Yes. I like what you said about them impressing on you and seeing yourself through these characters, because especially with like animation or just fiction in general, seeing someone express a bond, like whether it's like, because some of the moments that made me cry most in Naruto weren't romantic, it was just friendship. And like, hey, I got you, or I see you. Because I watched Naruto during quarantine, so I was away from my parents. I was like, oh, cool, are we going to die? Am I not going to see him again? And I'm seeing all these, like, and same thing with, like, friends. I'm seeing all these heartfelt moments of friendships, of parent and child relationships, of complex parent and child relationships, and it's just going, like, it gives you a template for expression, for dialogue.
Yeah.
And I was watching Naruto, or there's like other times where I'm listening to things where I'll think about people who probably hate my guts or we ended things on bad terms with, but I think about things they were trying to teach me that I was too arrogant to pay attention to, that I didn't consider worth learning to keep them around for. And in a weird way, through fiction, I was able to see, like, oh, I'm still grieving the absence of that person. There's still a part of me hoping I'll cross paths with them, just to be like, to say, I got what you were trying to say. I'm trying to be a better person because of something you taught me. I saw what strength was in a different light because of you. Mm-hmm. And that I did not acknowledge it till later, because I feel like that's a lot of the grieving process, is you realizing there's so much more you wanted to say.
Yeah. Whether
they are gone forever or gone circumstantially and it doesn't look good. Like, that's, I feel like the part that chokes me up with grieving is, and that's one of the like things that drives me to like art and poetry, is like, if you had 3 minutes to get it all out, to say everything, what would you say? And I feel like that's where poetry, writing, whether it's like writing for a show or writing just a poem, it's your chance to get it out and to say it right. And who knows how many countless people were involved in sharing their pain, their grief, or their love to express that through fiction, and that it manifested in that. And maybe that's why it's hitting us so heavily, because it's a jutsu manifested by hundreds of art shinobi. And
mm-hmm. Absolutely. It's all existing in that continuum of infinity, the divine, whatever we want to call it. And it's all just continuing that relay. That's the metaphor that keeps me going, really. If I am able to, someone passed the baton to me, and I know that this baton is from at least my great-grandmother. So my great-grandmother is passing the baton to my mom, who passed the baton to me, and even if it's just meant for me to see a moment that would have made my great-grandmother happy, that's what keeps me going. Because, we're no strangers to ideation, we're no strangers to loss of hope, we're no strangers to nihilism. It's just coming to face with that and stacking it up with, hey, maybe even if it's just by a couple of points, a descent is not afforded by the sacrifices that have been made so far for your benefit, depending on how much personal responsibility one can stand at that point. Sometimes you do need to take everything kit and caboodle and tumble down, and I've been there before. And all you can do is hey, at that lower level, appreciate what's around, pick up and collect what you can, and then just start climbing again. Because at the top of another mountain is the foot of another. That's just how the world's structured.
Well said. You talked about that baton getting passed off.
Mm-hmm.
In your case, that baton had a lot of responsibility attached to it. How did you manage the weight of that baton being passed on? Because for a lot of people grieving like me, it's like, I didn't, aside from feeling more motivated to participate in a few other things, it wasn't like I had to step up and be a breadwinner when I lost friends or partners. So how did you manage the weight of that baton? Because just telling the stories, unpacking the generational trauma is hard enough, but then having that financial burden and that my family needs me, and I can imagine it was difficult to both juggle your own emotions while providing, and a lot of people in those cases would just cut themselves off emotionally altogether to just get through it.
Yeah.
How did you manage the weight of that baton?
I'm no stranger to that answer as well. However, looking back on it, it's very fortunate and very intentional on my mom's part as that kind of fulcrum to keep it all in balance. When my uncle died, the means died, but the dream wasn't going to die until mom died. So I had that space to be in these art adjacent environments where honestly I was living my bliss and running away in a healthy manner. I was like, okay, all I wanted was a paycheck. So I got a paycheck. But there were these other things along the way, these interesting little morsels of people acting at a higher level than you are given to see in an audition scenario. People actually imbibing the classics and reinterpreting them for you. So, as I was alluding to earlier, my time in regional theater really saved me, broadened my environment, broadened my like slate of experiences, because you get stuck. You're stuck with the colors on your canvas. You're stuck with the colors on your palette for a while, especially when you're growing up. And you don't dare mix them because you don't know where the next like glob of paint's gonna come from, and you don't know if you're just going to mess up these little, compartmentalized neat things that you have available to you. So in the space between my uncle dying and my mom finally passing away was just the exploration and the realization that my life as a PA and music assistant at that time had a ceiling, and it was a very tight EQ, to use a music production term, where I'm like, oh, okay, it's peaking, but I'm like, what? Who put that ceiling there but me? And by the time I finally did have to let go, that's when my work opportunities were starting to blossom out more, and I was being asked to do more complicated things, run more complicated shows, sometimes call shows, and be a member of my community as a stage manager, as an assistant stage manager. I was able to mind that escalation of responsibility with an escalation of, an escalation of purpose. So by the time we were doing like immersive mazes and working with people whose names you definitely recognize, I would be in a space where I'm like, hey, I'm placed here to do this, and I end up living in my threat to myself, being like, hey, one day you're going to be doing something immensely less important. So receive this and stand tall on this mountain for a second.
Wow. I I'll always love it when you see someone in a supporting role who loves what they do. Yeah. They're just like, no, this is what I'm needed. And like, because those are the ones you learn from. Those are the ones when other people are getting into it. It's like you can be real with them of like, oh, it'd be great if you actually stood here instead of there, or we don't need you over here, but rest up, because we might need you in the future. And that perspective of enjoy it now because this is the most important thing you're going to be doing maybe for a while. Because that's how I felt volunteering for the fire stuff was just like, oh, this isn't my self-aggrandizing artistry, and I knew artists and performers who were like going, oh, I'll volunteer when it's not cool. And even though there were times where we had to turn away volunteers, it's like there's a million other things you could be doing. It's just a lot of them were more like just organizer stuff that was less hands-on and more like broader and long-term. But that was kind of why I volunteered for 14 hours one day, 8 hours the next, and then I was still working full-time at that time. So I went to work just drained, but just going like, I like what I do for work, but volunteering, there was something that carried me where it's just like, no, this is where I'm needed. And you talked about people getting what they earned. I had a family friend who, in my union, worked for decades, near retirement, lost everything. And when the COVID stuff started to wind back, they welcomed us into their yard in Altadena, and they had a big old movie projector outside, and we all got to socially distance and hang out and see our work family and because we were all like in the same business, it was just like, oh, you know how it is, you know what's in store, and they lost that all. And it was just one of the kindest people you'd ever meet, and them and their wonderful partner are now figuring their situation out. But that was like what motivated me, is like, hey, even though my place ain't huge, it's a lot more than most people have, and I can go back to it anytime I want today, but I want to be here. And the only reason I stopped volunteering was because of like burning myself out. But I empathize with that and I feel like that's a great lesson for a lot of people to take in of like, hey, you may never you might not save the day in the way you imagined, but you can do something really important for a little bit and have fun with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So to bring it back to another question I had related to the last one.
Okay.
What are some unhealthy coping mechanisms you've had?
Oh boy.
And I hope your list isn't as long as mine.
Okay. I've always been pretty boring, pretty chaste. So honestly, for me, it was video games. I love gamers. I consider myself a gamer still, but I would not be healthy about my gaming habits. You know, I fell prey to a couple of gacha games. I fell prey to a bit of like Doom New Game Plusing, when I just realized that's not okay. Everybody's front line is where they happen to be standing. I'll say that first. But where I tend to be calling, where my calling tends to be, is, you know, like interfacing with people. So it becomes a self-indulgent, it becomes like, I need time to recharge when interfacing with people, but it becomes self-indulgent and borderline self-destructive when I have an excuse to not be amongst the world.
Ooh.
And I always use video games for that. You know? That was just my coping mechanism when I've been dealing with this dichotomy of, hey, I've been able to make big things happen by being out front. I'm going to spite the world by not being out front. Ooh. And it goes back to you mentioned this really interesting connection between Union Strong values and what we're dealing with now in the aftermath of the fires. And it kind of ties into this out front moment that started to radicalize me again in terms of the strikes, which is a big thing LA has been going through, like prior to the fires. The fires is kind of like the fifth thing, honestly.
Oh, yeah. It feels like we've been... Because in there, dude, it's like we can't go 6 months without some labor dispute, natural disaster, crony capitalism, because that's the because the Palisades, it was marginally more affluent, but there was still just so many people who just lost everything. Yeah. But they were worried about all the houses in the hills, and I was filming for the fires as they approached the valley. And I was a safe distance away. I just had a great view. Some private security said, "Are you scoping out these houses to break in?" And I was like, "No, I'm watching my community burn. Is that okay?" Like,
oh my gosh.
But it was just, I looked down at all these houses. These people had left. They probably weren't in town. They were probably at their 3rd or their 4th house. Mm-hmm. And it just broke my heart. It's like, can we just have this moment of, we might be losing it? And that was at the time when you didn't know what part of LA was going to be on fire next. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, it's been a couple of years, like...
Yeah, it's been a couple of really tumultuous years for LA, and honestly, it's been a bellwether for the whole nation. When we had specifically the double strike between WGA and SAG-AFTRA, that was a rare opportunity for me to be out in my community. So I answered the call there. Mm-hmm. I put aside a lot of little baggage where I was like, oh man, why do I even do this? Why don't I just go be an insurance adjuster or something? But insurance adjusters are this close to getting tarred and feathered. Yeah, at this point with the country's going, I'm not sure insurance adjuster is like everything you work for, that we'll give you $2,000. Like just there you go. I mean, sometimes it feels like I'm gonna get tarred and feathered as an actor sometimes, but I've been a member of SAG since I was 6 years old. And I've always tried to be more involved, but a lot of the time circumstances didn't allow for that. This was an opportunity for me to get out there, get in my community, and just assess what is needed. Assess what creative wound is there. It's an obvious creative wound. No jobs are available. And even on the crew side, it's just been cataclysmic for the Rust Belt of Los Angeles, that being our crew people, our logistics people, all of these people that belong on set And in all of our perfect world, we'd be on 300 plus productions. We'd be on so much more. But basically, getting to know my acting community in a grassroots way was the biggest takeaway and the biggest like purpose jolt I've had in the last couple years. And it made me realize, like, oh, okay, all of those near miss collaborations I did when I was on like background sets or when I was just connecting with some people doing my PA stuff and like shooting music videos on the side. Collaborative economics is the way forward. Um, just understanding laterally how to network is the way forward. And it sounds, you know, it sounds icky. It sounds like an uphill battle. It takes a lot of pride to be put aside. But really, if we're just waiting for some nebulous paycheck based on whatever mergers are happening soon, wouldn't it feel better to like get your own stuff out there, make it, have it like distribute it yourself, going like just melding a lot of like just like Nipsey Hussle was able to do with his mixtapes. Look at what he was able to build. Just not to say everyone's going to be the next Nipsey Hussle, but at least if you have an idea, the germ of an idea, you can communicate it.
Yeah. I like how you mentioned how you talked about you overcame that isolation through seeking out community.
Mm-hmm.
I could talk shop about the finer points, but I would love to do it not on air.
Okay, yeah, let's do it.
Better breadcrumbs and maybe the whole loaf, but isolation. That's like always the slippery slope with grief and with other like conditions is when you start to isolate, you're like, they don't get me, and then the longer you isolate, the longer and harder it is to connect with people.
Yeah.
Because like, I'm an introvert, so I know I need at least one day a week where I do not leave the place I habitate.
Mm-hmm.
And if I have to step outside during that time, I'm like, slogans. Like, so that's great that you overcame that. And video games are super addicting. I remember like I kind of just honestly like I losing Carlos. I was kind of done with shooters. I was with guns and all that stuff. I can't, like, I played a few after and I'll play games here and there, but I can't unthink that.
Mm-hmm.
And like as far as like, oh, looking down the sights, headshots, it's like that was another thing where, and I was really into Call of Duty, but that's where I was like, okay, melee games. No one die by spear or hidden blade. Leave me Assassin's Creed.
Yeah.
So I get that, and they're so cool and addicting. And I know someone who's a professional gamer. Yeah, and they were when they were a kid, they were a prodigy athlete. Like,
oh my god.
Like to the extent where like they were younger than me, and I'd be like, oh crap, you're keeping up with me. Like this, you're gonna be famous. Like just that kind of. But they got really into gaming. They got so good at gaming they became a professional gamer, but they got really out of shape during that time. And then they became insecure about their body and stopped hanging out with their friends who they knew were still staying active. And cut them off entirely. Won't even reach out. They've tried reaching out to this person. And it's like, you're a professional gamer. You should be going like, oh yeah, I can't keep up with you guys, but I'm a professional gamer. Fuck you, fuck you, fuck you. Like, that should be how it's like, oh yeah, I'm out of shape, but it's because I'm doing what all of you wish you could do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And honestly, this guy's made more money gaming than I have doing all of the arts ever combined. Like,
yeah.
Even at one point, I'm like, should I get back into video games? I don't know if comedy's the like thing. Poet.
That's the end game for new comedians, you know? It's like, hey, get on Kick, be a streamer.
But like that's seeing as that like that's someone who went a different route, and because it does take courage to step out. And video games, that is one of the drawbacks of like, oh, if you play guitar, your fingers will get calloused. If you play baseball, you'll get cleated. If you play video games too much, you might become body dysmorphic and overweight. And And it's interesting that it's a sport when it's like the side effect is horrible body shape.
Right. Right. No, for real. You
And,
get you get so like back to the point of what you were saying about being death averse after you lose somebody, like particularly through these video games and this media and stuff. It's the radicalizing effect of video games was also something that was not lost to me. You become very flippant about the idea of like, oh, if I just rack up this many headshots,
yeah.
but then you find, oh, you lose something in life, you lose someone,
Mm-hmm.
then it's just, oh, it's two sides of the same coin. It leads to that, the dysphoric idea of yourself because you're like, gosh, I enjoy spending my time like this. What kind of person am I?
Yeah, and I also think there's just a fair disconnect. Like, this very much was a trauma response.
Yeah.
I'd much rather have people kill people in video games than in real life.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think games can be a bit of an outlet of that, but just that my brain couldn't separate that connection, that task of looking down the sights, and so.
Love it.
So what? Before we get into the timeline, what is the worst advice you've gotten while grieving?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what was just the like, screw this person? Like, this.
It was very contextually dependent, but when my uncle did the Robin Williams in Good Will Hunting thing of "It's not your fault,"
Oh my.
that was not perfect. When he just said, "It's not your fault. It's not your fault. It's not your fault," over and over again. It's good advice depending on the context, but it just didn't hit at the right time. In reality, the worst advice was probably from one of my more self-serving relatives that was like, oh, okay. They were basically like stringing me along to like financially support them, like long term, and like kind of just trying to burrow into my head and be like, hey, okay, I live here now. I'm going to be your new bestest friend, and like we were never that close even when she was alive, so this might be an eventuality she was trying to prevent. So, got to be careful because people might have you living the logical conclusion or a highly illogical conclusion of what they wished someone that you lost was in their life. Whether that be a meal ticket, whether that be romantic prospect, you got to be careful because you might be living some necrotic abomination. And I almost ended up there just based on the gulf that was left in a lot of people's lives by my parents passing on. So, a lot of really, as far as advice goes, everyone was really supportive, so I can't pin that on anyone else.
I know people who will say it's not your fault as a joke,
Mm-hmm.
and it's just like the context of that statement. Just I get it, and I don't know if it's because I have a beard and they're like, "Ah, you look like Robin Williams and Good Will Hunting," or it's just because it's like saying, "Who hurt you?" It's just it's one thing when you're in the middle of a deep conversation and then it gets asked, but if someone just goes, "Oh, who hurt you?" Because I had someone gaslight me in an argument, say, "Who hurt you?" and I was just like, I had to hold back my inner primate because I was just like, "Where's the rock?"
Yeah, right. That's funny.
So, you want to guess where this timeline starts as we get into this? Because I have a timeline of the history of grief.
Ooh, man.
So
that sounds super fascinating. I'm guessing. I mean, it's definitely before the land bridge in Africa. That's my guess. Like, because that's where we find like people with buried bodies and stuff, right?
All right.
That's my guess.
No, that's good. Knowing me, you went like Neolithic, and that's probably the ideal route for this. So, before I get into this, I just want to acknowledge that all cultures, camera one, all cultures have a history of grief, funeral services, rites, and theology that is sacred, fascinating, and deserves its own history unpacking from people from those backgrounds who can do it proper justice. This is just a general timeline to provide framework. So, 450,000 years ago, around that time, humans took our anatomical shape as we are. So that's the time where we're starting out. And this pushes the bar back from the 2018 thinking of 300,000 to 200,000 years of us being brain size and body. That's where the starting timeline for humans is. But the earliest funeral acknowledgement of grief, of death, is 70,000 years ago. I'm sure humans were doing stuff for that gap of time then. There's just no burials or anything to indicate that they were doing acknowledgments of grief of passing. So 70,000 years ago, in the hills of northern Iraq, one of the oldest intentional burials was performed by Neanderthals. The burial was in Shanidar Cave, which was used by the Neanderthals as a graveyard on and off until their extinction about 30,000 years ago. So, for a 40,000 year period, they were coming back periodically, sometimes more frequently, and burying their dead there. And there's huge debate over whether the flower petals that were found in with some of the burials were accidental or intentional. Wild, right?
It's insane. It's like, oh my gosh, we do honor these. There's some reverence to death, of course, and it's like how much of anything we do is baked in. How much of that? Like, this is beautiful work you've done on this timeline so far. I was just piecing it together. I love it.
Thank you. Well, okay, so this is the least debated one. There's Homo nedeleni, and Netflix had a series called Unknown Cave of Bones, and it was an even further back primate relative, around 200,000 to 260,000 years ago. But this is the most hot. This is one of the history nerds are slugging it out over. Podcasts across the history and science sphere are taking different sides. So that's why I was just I wanted to start off a little more concrete. No, the Neanderthals, totally. This other one, I just, you wanted to include it, but it's just hey, do I? Because that's always the fun thing of doing this research, and I wanted to be upfront about is it's like with the Mongols. There's the enticing fictionality of what they did, and then there's the reality. I think both can be appreciated, but there has to be that nuance there. So officially, the oldest burial, 70,000 years ago. And these are in the hills, so it's not like they're left out in the open. This was trekked up, and they found that the oldest people in the Neanderthal communities were women, grandmothers. They were vestals of knowledge, and they found that the women have more of a brain longevity than men as far as neurological processing, power, memory retention. So that they were concluding, theorizing that women were the knowledge keepers, and they were the ones remembering this cave. So
wow.
They were burying people before humans were.
That's insane.
We were existing at the same time. We intermingled and had offspring, but it was maybe we learned burials from Neanderthals.
Oh my gosh. Wow. It really paints a picture of who we are. Of the 3 branches of humanity that didn't, that were in contention for making it.
Yeah, Denisovans, Neanderthals, and Neanderthal. Denisovans, Neanderthals, and Homo sapiens.
There you go.
Yeah, it's someone comes back with their Neanderthal girlfriend, guys, I got this crazy idea. What if we didn't leave them out?
Right.
What if we didn't leave the bodies? What if we put them someplace and
yeah.
threw flower petals in with it? It's just...
Yeah. In what other ways did Homo sapiens not have their stuff together? That's what makes you think. Yeah.
Yeah, or just we like. Yeah, and there's like artwork by Neanderthals and Denisovans. One of the earliest, actually, like evidence of medicine practicing healing a broken bone comes from Neanderthals.
Wow.
So I was like, whoa, that's
Hmm.
yeah. As far as like thinking about expressions.
Yeah.
So bringing this back to the timeline, sometime between 23 and 79 AD, Roman military commander and scholar Gaius Plinius Secundus, aka Pliny the Elder, recorded elephants to be in a state of mourning after the death of another elephant.
Oh, whoa.
So in ancient Rome, this guy was, I'm not sure if he was like noticed these elephants. I couldn't find any information if he's like noticed them in Africa or if that was like the elephants they kept in captivity.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But I just love I love that duality of ancient history where it's like you're conquering territory and it's like here let me write my dissertation.
Yeah. Just being like, oh yes, we have our anthropologists. We're gonna kill the ones that are here, but we're gonna let them figure out at least a portion of what they know.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's deeply fascinating. But yeah, as far as like ancient Rome goes, I'm warming up to them. For a long time, it felt like very, oh, that's just forbidden knowledge. That's just exclusionary. That's just like, oh, okay, these are the people that would have folks like me in chains. But now we're getting a broader view of it.
And I feel like that's the reason people gravitate toward Rome is they wrote everything down and they kind of burned everything else. So it's just like, hey, we're kind of like there's a reason we kept referencing back to them, and the plot twist is they're evil and burned everyone else's cultures. Mm-hmm. So just you go where it's like, we don't mean to be Roman history geeks. It's just they're the most
of the options available.
Yeah, it's like if someone destroyed all the sci-fi and left you with Star Wars. It's just like,
which fine. Star Wars kind of did, didn't it?
I prefer others, but fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then also it's like, as a history nerd, I like the Romans. As a Celt, I fucking hate them. Because...
Nice.
Yeah, and that's the duality where it's like, you hate Caesar, but then as a fan of compelling villains, you're like, he's like Darth Vader with Riz and no mechanized body. You know?
True. Yeah.
So we're going to jump a bit from ancient Rome to the 60s. In 1963, broken heart phenomenon was first documented. Evidence indicated that in the first 6 months after experiencing loss, there's an increased risk of mortality for people grieving. And this, of course, comes from a variety of factors, everything from like cardiovascular, heart rate, you're not sleeping as well or eating, and then, of course, people partaking in vices. Like, seems like I did more so in my grieving process. And others do. So, but overall, it's an increased risk of mortality after a loss. Because you always hear about those old couples where it's like the partner dies and then 6 months later. And going more into this broken heart phenomena, 1972. Jane Goodall observed a young male chimp named Flint stop eating and socializing after the death of his mother, Flo. Flint eventually died from his refusal to eat.
And and so that just transcends like human self-involvement, doesn't it?
Oh yeah, because we have a same ancestors, chimps, but that they are experiencing the same grief, and it's hard enough losing your mother when you can rationalize it. But when you're a young chimp and that is your world, your food, your shelter, the world, I'm angry and I don't know why. And like, hey, when I get sad, I isolate too. And especially grieving. Like, I didn't mention this before, but like, I cut myself off because Carlos died in October. another friend of mine from high school died in November, and in the middle of that, Trump got elected.
No way.
So I was, even though I had a circle of friends, a lot of our circle was degeneracy, smoking, drinking, getting into trouble. And when I stopped coming through to the hangouts, because I was in college, people know, like, word got around. I lived on campus where I was and what I was doing, and it was just, I was lying in my dorm room on my bed, listening to sad music, just numb, because I was having this disillusionment with reality, and it was just like I didn't want to get close to people because the people I was getting close to were dying. And I got a knock on my door. It was all the people from our little hangout on campus at my door, and I was just like, guys, I'm out of it. And they're like, we don't care. We're just gonna keep you company. And they piled into my bedroom, and people were drinking, having a good time, and I lied on my bed, and I forgot who it was. One of the women in our group just lied and kept their hand in my hair, sat on the bed with me. I would occasionally chime in and crack a snarky joke, but it was just, they felt my absence. And they knew a bit that I was grieving friends. They didn't know the ones I lost, but they're like, no, we're not gonna let you go through this. And the fact that they hung out while I was numb and more or less just not really responding, aside from the occasional joke or that I was paying attention to the discussion, like, it's the friends who don't let me isolate that save my life, because that's still my strategy. And when I am going through it now, I'll cut myself off, and I have friends who will knock on my door, blow my phone up, and say, no, you're not getting away from us that easy. And I think that's a huge anecdote, is I was lucky enough to have communities who would not let me escape. Like, no, you're stuck in this with us. Like, and how important, like, that's the role of a community in combating this, because that's something beyond me. That is other people taking agency.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And it's like, I am immensely indebted to those people that were like, hey, seem a little quiet. Let's make sure. And it's like, once they do that for you, you're there for them for the rest of your life, because you owe every moment to those just actions, to those actions that they did. Yeah.
Isolation.
Isolation. It is a real killer.
1977, a study published by Roger Bartrope, it was noted that grief can impact humans on a biochemical and physiological level. That change in heart rate, blood pressure, circadian rhythms, your fight or flight. Because I definitely remember that after, like, Carlos got shot. He wasn't even getting into trouble. Me and other friends were. We were getting into plenty of trouble with cops, with running into gang members. Like, there were plenty of times where I could have been shot. Like, and that was where I was like, what?
Yeah.
We were more or less asking for it because we were all partying and punk rock skater shenanigans. Carlos was minding his own fucking business. That was where I was like, definitely my heart rate. Every time I was on a plane after that, we hit turbulence. I'm like, this is it.
Right.
This
is where I get it.
We die young. And then I was like, oh, wait, I'm not good enough to die young. Just like that kind of thinking was swirling in my head, because you're just always like, is this it?
Wow.
Is this it? Like, yeah.
That's insane. Yeah, because honestly, there are so many times where, like, all right, it's like the world of the dead becomes more familiar than the world that you're living in.
Oh yeah, because it's like, it's gonna happen to all of us, but when you lose someone, you're just like, oh, it's like just going through a window.
Yeah.
So 2017, Zambia, at the Chim Fun Shi Wildlife Orphanage Trust, a chimp named Thomas died, and his adopted mother attempted to clean his teeth. Heart just...
So sad. Yeah.
Yeah, just... And adopted too, like, it's not my... He wasn't my baby in the beginning, but he's my baby till the end.
Yeah, this care has to go somewhere.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And I have a very close relationship with a step parent. Like, and my mom has that with her stepchildren, and it's a beautiful bond that because you learn things from a different motherly style, from a different perspective, from someone with other life experiences who laughs at things a little differently or can see the world from a different angle. And I think, and when I was reading that, I was like, oh my, like that. It's cool that it's not, because in some animal realms, it's just like, I'm trying to mate with your mother. I'm going to kill you because half your genes aren't mine.
Right.
Also, food. Like.
Yeah, people. Yeah, hey, that's not
Like
that's
bears
not
are
been bred out yet.
Bears are cuddly until
that.
you find out what they do to half children.
Right. Yeah, different side of the Winnie the Pooh there, right? Oh my god. Oh my god. Yeah, humans can do some deplorable things when it becomes like base instincts in life and death, but there's a certain degree of refinement and higher self that's called in moving past those elements.
Yeah, and I feel like it's I'm just thinking of the wildlife researchers where they're like, Steve, why are you crying? And they're pointing to the mother cleaning the teeth.
It's just like, this will be remembered.
There's like, the panic's running because of my tears.
Right. It's the Roy Mustang thing. It must be raining. Yeah.
2018, Vancouver. An orca mother off the coast stayed with the corpse of her dead calf for 17 days.
Whoa. Oh no. That's so sad.
17 days in Canadian waters. That is cold.
And the orca's supposed to be deeper.
No, they breathe air. And,
Okay.
But it's just that duality of like orcas will knock seals out of the water with their tails and catapult them, killing them as a joke.
Yeah.
And then this is where I'm like so human, where you'll wreck another species, but then you'll like will not acknowledge the death of your own. And I like.
That's
a
word.
Oh, I will drop this critter for fun, not for food. Also, my baby, it's not dead. That shared duality of disregard for one life, but then sacredness for your own.
I love it. Yeah, it's like, it's a reckoning we're coming with as, just by process of elimination, the purported highest life form. The death of many things, and it's like the road to life lies in something that we've already removed from the table.
Yeah. These are more accounts that probably the last 20 years I couldn't get exact dates for, but they were noted in this research. So the grief, or more simply a death response, to like put it roughly for other species terms, has been documented in some form in seals, manatees, dingoes, horses, dogs, and house cats.
It's a redemption for the dingo. Maybe it ate its baby, but why did it eat the baby?
If it was a different species, so I'll cut it that slack. Humans, being a history nerd, there's a list of 15 to 20 things that I can't unlearn that humans have done to each other. And they range from ancient torture methods that are both as evil as they are, where you're to more Unit 731 or Nazi Germany. The number one thing that made me, where it's the fewest amount of words that struck the most amount of horror into me, was an Al Jazeera podcast that started with Israel's Guantanamo. And when I heard those two words, I paused. I'm I'm gonna throw up.
Right.
Just that combination of words and where my imagination goes with that, I'm just
this need not exist.
Unit 731 might be and the Holocaust and the Nazis might be in tie for 2 and 3 now. Because I was like, that was 2 words, and all of the horrors of humans are capable of flashed into me with.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're saying like dingoes ate a baby, maybe I didn't hear about that. But it's like, you know what?
It was a dumb joke.
If you were to say Australians ate a baby, I'd be like, God damn Australians.
Right.
But so yeah, dingo. Like I feel like with dogs and house cats, we notice it more because they're around. Like when dogs go to the cemetery or.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh, so more accounts of animals. The bones of one dead elephant were visited by 5 different elephant families.
Whoa.
Yeah, had a funeral procession.
Elephant Dawn. Wow.
The dolphin of a mother carrying her dead calf was escorted by 15 other dolphins swimming at a slow pace.
Wow. Okay. So
to be fair,
imitate that with cars.
No, but knowing what horny maniacs dolphins are, I'm guessing half of them were trying to.
Yeah, just trying to hunch real quick.
They're just like, hey, she's not pregnant now.
Right. Oh Lord.
No, I like when you.
No, you're right.
Dolphins are big brain horny idiots like us too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I can imagine a few of them were there for nefarious purposes.
Yeah, right. And who hasn't attended some of those folks do attend funerals for nefarious purposes too. Just being like, hey, rebound.
A baby giraffe that died had a vigil held for it by 27 adults.
Okay. Wow. Were their heads low or high?
Probably just take a step back, like back it up so their heads wouldn't all bonk. Or,
yeah, right.
They all get like stuck.
Absolutely. Yeah, they all like not together.
The highest funeral in Africa.
Yeah, right? Mm-hmm. Highest funeral in Africa. Very good.
2 ducks who were rescued from the same location stayed at the same sanctuary and formed a bond. When one died, the other laid their head on their friend's neck for hours.
Oh, ducks. Patos.
So carrying dead infants for weeks or months is common in many primate species. In extreme cases, dead babies were carried by their mothers until they were mummified from the heat and dryness, a skeleton, or just a spine.
Wow. Yeah.
Like, just... Cheryl, he's gone, and they're holding his spine. He's with us.
He's still with us. Yeah.
Right, Johnny?
Mm-hmm.
Dude, just...
I mean, it's so real, that slate of feelings, because, like, if we didn't have all of these artifacts and all of this abstract that we can prove someone's existence with nowadays, like, I understand bone collectors in some ways.
Yeah, and we're lucky enough to have art and media to express our means through, where it's just like, they don't have ceremony, they don't have tradition, so they can't honor them with the burial and then leave the body there. They can't. So you don't have the tradition to let go of the physical body, and that's where it was like, my heart sank, where it's just, and all the love of a mother, but it being so broad and not being able to focus, and just them trying to cling on. And then also you feel bad for all the others in the tree. Just that thing's
right. Yeah, and they have heightened senses, because it's like, oh great, now we all feel this grief to the nth degree.
We smell the grief.
We're smelling the grief over here.
So getting into more of the modern stuff, the 5 stages of grief are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And there's plenty of YouTube videos that unpack those way better than we are here. But those are roughly the 5 stages people go through. They look differently for so many people. Is there anything that we didn't cover in these conversations or stuff you want to share about your journey going through your stages of grief?
Well, I kind of speed ran it over the last couple weeks because I lost the person who kept me reading through middle school. She was 88. I got to go to this beautiful Zoom funeral where her whole Caribbean family was like giving different perspectives on the big life that she lived. And I'm like, I feel so grateful to have been a part of that big life. But, before that ceremony put it in perspective for me, I had just these sleepless nights, and I found myself calling on a better version of myself. I found myself understanding like what they saw in me in a way that had distance from what I thought my parents saw in me. So sort of what we were talking about earlier, those 5 stages start to like string together the more you lose. So it's almost like a revolutionary act to keep on living and see what else they can teach you.
Wow. I like how you said what you talked about, how you said they saw something in me my parents didn't, and I feel that's so important. That's why people need teachers, big cousins, fun uncles and fun aunts to show them a different side of themselves, because your parents have their own ideas about what they want you to be, and that's partially to do with their intentions making you. But having someone who can be like, no, you did this thing right, and they're not carrying that it from a place of like overseer, but a place of someone you're coexisting with.
For real.
Like, it's not an order or a dictation or a circuit, or like, how your parents will say like, oh, you should go to college, and maybe not for everyone, but when your parents ascribe things onto you to live your life, it's cool because these things people see in you seem more optional, things you can embrace. Like Paul Mabon saw I was a comedian in me long before I ever considered it, and he was giving me tools to use down the road that I utilized as a poet, but didn't realize, like, oh, with comedy, it's like, that's what this jutsu can really do. That's why he put me through those tough days and those tough workshops.
Yeah.
And I feel like those figures are so important. And people lose a bit of that because they associate school with being boring, or, oh, this ain't my thing, but it's... I still think back to teachers from middle school, just people who say, oh, you should try this. You did that good. It would be cool to see if you did more in that world. Because you feel more open to it, because it's not like with stuff from parents or family where you feel like you're letting them down if you don't do it.
Definitely. The stakes were higher in some ways because this person is assessing who you are up into this road. But what really made the difference, and we're talking about the liminality between life and death, and how that relates to one's self-image. I was able to visit this last person in the hospital before they went, and we were talking about like, oh, there's still this much injustice on the table, and this person who's committed their life to promoting just acts is meeting their end. And this isn't somebody who I'm tied to through blood. I'm only tied to through our bonds and our periodic talks and our concurrent ideologies. It's like, okay, it's almost emboldening to like uphold that congruent spirit. So now I just got to find more people. Like, it's rare that, based on how we are socialized to understand death, it's rare that it energizes you to seek out more life. So if that's the response I can train going forward, then that's one that I'm willing to accept.
Oof. Well said. I appreciate how you talked about how this person isn't related to me, but I carry on their will, their energy.
Yeah.
And I feel that some people think, oh, because my family did this or came from that background, I have to do this. But no, if you feel called, determined, and that's where your heart is, go do that. Because I really liked how you talked about how this is how they dedicated their life to activism, to trying to make the world a better place, and that perspective on the work still needs to be done. I did everything I could, but and I feel like that's where a lot of us are at. Those who came up in Get Lit and organizing, the 20 and 30 somethings now, this is our turn to dig in, because whether it's like more famous artists like Rise Against or our senseis in art, they're passing the torch on.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And it's a heavy baton to carry, but even I realized I could dedicate my whole life to this, and there's still going to be an ocean of work that needs to be done.
Exactly.
But
it's all our capsules that we're able to create. Yeah,
but the least I can do is refine my knowledge. What's the essential stuff? How can I connect people? How can I share these skills? Because I learned a lot from people in my travels, in my organizing, that I feel a similar weight to. Like, I talked to San Francisco state activists who organized the 68 strike, the longest student strike in U.S. history. The reason there's cops on the Cal State University campuses now. And the conversations we had, I was like, oh, you're passing it on to me. This isn't just a conversation. This is what you learned boiled down into a few sentences that you're leaving with me as I'm engaging in the same struggle and similar circumstances that you engaged in. Same thing with getting into my ancient ancestry, where it's like, oh, how many people died and how few had to survive for us to get this fragment of a message, for me to learn about the true nature of my heritage in my late 20s from the internet and not from my own elders. Because my own clans had forgotten their history. And I feel like for a lot of us artists and us more spiritually in tune, that calling is being felt across the board. And I'm excited that others are feeling that determination and that calling, because I feel like artists are in a headspace that other people are still coming out of, and many are still stuck in it. They're still looking for a savior, but we're the saviors. We're the vanguard. We're the warriors.
Yes. We are the new adults. It is
to quote Rise Against, are we the generation we've been waiting for?
Yeah.
So,
it's lovely.
Before we close out, is there anything you wanted to promote? Anything you wanted to plug?
I am in this proof of concept series that's currently in its post-production fundraising zone. It's called Binge, where we jump through all these TV worlds, and it's a lot of humanistic processing. It's how we survive in the stories we tell ourselves. And it's a great series. So we did a 15-page proof of concept, and we filmed it before the beginning of the year, before the fires, and we're really proud of it. So you can find information about it at my Instagram at KidFromPerry. Yeah. Thank you so much, Shane.
Of course. Thank you for being on here. Thank you for braving the rain. It's always a...
I love the rain. Some of my best days in life have been when it's raining. So
I agree, and when I lived in San Francisco for 5 years, I got used to just coexisting with the rain, skateboarding in it, and it, like, as uncomfortable and as crazy as that sounds, when it's something you get accustomed to, and everyone's just like, hey, we're all going to be a little wet, whereas even on a rainy day in LA, if you're not out there with an umbrella and a nylon coat, people are going to ask what's wrong with you, but it's like, no, I like feeling the droplets and connecting, and...
Yeah, absolutely. You know, connection to nature is so important and deeply undervalued.
Yeah, and rainy days are great for writing.
Oh yeah, I love the moody vibes. I'm probably going to go home and write up this screenplay project that I'm doing soon.
We look forward to hearing it. Thank you so much for being on. It's Killing Me and coming out and being our first guest back after our hiatus. You can find It's Killing Me at It's Killing Me on all social media. More episodes to come, more projects in the works. I'm Shane Kenny Comedy on all social media. Thank you for listening.